Hey everyone, this is Bathymetrics and welcome to episode 8 of GridSchool for Bitwig 3.0. Today I'm going to be talking about logic basics and logic testing, but I'm actually going to be spending the next 4 episodes talking about more advanced uses for logic and some specific use cases that are very common. So next 4 episodes are all about logic, and I'm going to do it in small chunks so that you don't have to sit through a 1-hour deep dive about logic. As with all the videos in this series, if you haven't looked at the previous ones yet, you might want to go back and review those because I always build upon concepts and techniques I've described in earlier videos. So I'm going to assume you understand all the other basics we've covered up through episode 7. You can find all of these videos in one handy playlist. You can find a link to that playlist in the description for this video. And the other thing I want to point out is that another really great Bitwig video maker named Polarity, good sound designer, D&B artist, he did a really good video on logic modules that goes into some elements I probably won't be covering over the next 4 videos. So I highly recommend, if you haven't seen Polarity's video about logic, at some point you go check that one out too. Okay, so without further ado, let's hop into the basics of logic. So the logic stuff that you need to care about is mostly in this logic category. But if you remember from my episode about ports and prechords, anything that is a yellow color, like this port here or this port here, those are logic ports. And logic is in a few different places, really. I mean, logic is basically about, is a certain condition true or not? If it's true, do something. If it's not true, do something else. That's logic in a nutshell. Is, for example, if I press and hold down a MIDI key, is the key being held down or not? That's a logic decision, and that's effectively what a gate figures out, this little gate prechord. Or over in the I/O tab, if we specifically were to use a gate in, is this true or not? Am I holding down a key or not? See how this little yellow output port turns solid when I hold the key down? That's a logic decision. You could have a different type of input that's very closely related to the general gate. This will hear any key that I play. Right? But this one here, you can say, well, it's only true if it's a certain note number on a certain channel. Like if I play C3, it's not true, this one here. But if I play C1, now it's triggered, right? So the point is, over here in the I/O section, you have a couple inputs that are logic related, and they're colored yellow. And there's another one, of course, to see if the DAW transport is playing. If I press the play key up here, you're going to see this little port turn solid, which means the transport is playing. Play, stop, right? So logic, is a condition true or not? And what is the condition? Every little module is going to be testing for different conditions. All right. Another place logic kind of shows up is in the data section. And if you remember from one of my earlier overviews, pretty much everything in this first row is some type of generator. Either it's a manual generator that you're doing through various types of I/O ports, right? Or phase, which we'll get into about 5 more episodes down the road. These are definitely a kind of generated signal. Now, data is also a generated signal. You can think of these as sequencers, more or less. So they're things that automatically generate signals. And then these are a whole another ball of wax that we'll talk about when I'm talking about phase later down the road. But the point is, 2 of these generators, gates and probabilities, and also this thing called triggers, 3 of these all deal in logic. They're all spitting out signals that are either on or off, true or false. Okay, so that's logic in a nutshell. You don't have to be scared of logic. It's really useful for making decisions as we go. So again, the most basic type of logic decision is this prechord that's on every envelope. Am I holding down a key or not? And if I hold down the key, trigger the envelope. And when I let go of the key, trigger the release. Okay, so where logic comes in handy is when you want to deviate from this simple one and only kind of trigger signal you have. And here's where we have to get into the difference between a gate, which is this type of signal, and a trigger, which kind of looks like this arrow. Like this is a trigger port, okay? And this is a gate port. So they kind of look, they're really basically the same thing. It's just a matter of duration. So I'm going to bring in an oscilloscope. I'm going to spread it out a little bit. I'm going to go over here and slow it down to the slowest mode. And I'm going to come over here and hook up the gate to it. And then I'm also going to hook up the trigger to it. And I'm going to change the color of this trigger just to make it a little more clear what's what. So if I hold down a key, you can see this yellow line is representing the gate signal. If I click the trigger and let go, like that, you can see it's generating a blue signal. Now the difference is how long they are. Gate stays open for as long as the gate is active. It goes up to 1, stays at 1 until you let go, and then it drops back to 0. And logic and trigger signals are always unipolar. They never go negative unless you do something to make them go negative. So they're always unipolar. They're going to be at 0 or 1. Nothing in between, 0 or 1. Okay, that's me manually playing a key, so we're seeing the gate signal, and trigger is just a little blip. No matter how long I hold this down, it's going to wait till I let go and trigger it. Trigger, 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 right? Doing that with my mouse. So it's the same signal from 0 to 1. When it's at 1, it's true. When it's at 0, it's false. That's the condition. And you would use triggers when you just need to reset something or kick off a sequence or kick off a sampler plane or something like that. Typically for more envelope-related things like plain notes that have durations, you're going to want to use gates. So that's a gate versus a trigger in a nutshell. And I'll leave these over here for a minute. Now, you can have a button that is basically false when it's off, true when it's on. False when it's off, true when it's on. And you can also see over here the state of the logic signal coming out of this. When it's off, it's a 0. When it's on, it's right up all the way to the top at 1. Okay? And this can be really useful for turning things on, turning them off, obviously. Like, I could do a simple comparison like, let's start unhooking things for a minute. Let's bring this over here. Let's unhook it. And let's do an AND decision. And I'll describe what this is in a minute. I'm just showing you a thing. Bring this down here and turn off the pre-chord. So now I'm manually determining whether or not this envelope is going to fire. So I'm going to hold down keys. I'm playing keys. You can see this thing turning solid for the gate. And over here, you can see that the A signal on this AND, the top signal for this top little port here, over here you can see I'm holding down a gate. Short, 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 long, short, 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 long, holding down keys, but nothing's happening. The envelope is not triggering. And that's because this is a logic test. This is called a Boolean operator. And it's basically saying this isn't true unless both of the things coming into it are true. Okay? So just holding down the gate by itself over here, hold, 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 right, isn't enough to make this true. And so nothing's triggering the envelope. But if I turn on the button so that now the button is true, and you can see it's solid to show it's true, and now I press gate, right? As soon as I turn the button off, both conditions are no longer true anymore, no matter how much I hit the gate. Okay, so that's logic in a nutshell, is you can use these tests to determine whether or not signal keeps flowing and triggers something else. And typically you're going to hook up these buttons or triggers to either math comparisons or logic Boolean comparisons. And the outcome of these comparisons, see how it's always one little yellow port on the right-hand side, right? If that's true, then the logic thing you hook it up to will also be true and will happen. Okay, if it's not true, if this is hollow, then the thing you've hooked it up to won't happen. So that's logic in a nutshell. And I'll just show you a few basic things about all these, and it's easiest to demonstrate them by just dragging them down. We'll replace this. Now, what's going on here? This operator, you see it looks like an equal sign, but it's not really an equal sign. It's kind of a wavy sign, and that means roughly equal. Okay, so the idea here is that if two signals coming into this are roughly equal, then the condition is true. So in this case, if my button is on, but the gate is not being triggered because I'm pressing notes, if the button's on, that's not enough. They're not equal yet. But this is basically generating a solid 1 value. And when I press and hold a key, it's also generating a solid value of 1. So we get true. And then it lets the gate through. But if I turn this off, we're going to hear the gate constantly running and basically staying in the fully sustained position up here, because both of these values will be 0. And if I hold notes down, it will actually do the reverse of playing a note. It will blank out the sound. So watch this. It's going to be on, but as I hold a note down, it turns off. So I can actually use the keyboard to do the reverse of what it normally does because of this gate. All right. These other operators are basically saying, is the top signal greater than or equal to the bottom signal? Right? So again, this right now is 0. This right now is 1. So clearly the top one is less than the bottom one. So it's not true. But as soon as I press the gate and flip it up to 1, it'll be equal to. So it triggers. If I do greater than, it's the same thing, but it's just, it has to be greater than the bottom one. So since this is already at the max value of 1, if I press and hold notes, nothing's going to happen. Because 1 is equal to 1. It's not greater than 1. And so on and so forth. So that's what all these operators are. This one here is a not equal. So if I turn the button off, since they're both 0, they're exactly equal. But then as soon as I press this one or hold down a note, they're no longer equal. And so it triggers true and goes. So simple math operators, and this one's the most useful. We're going to get into this one later with some signal routing tricks, because you can make one sound play only when another sound is kind of at the same volume. I don't know. You'll see later in a later video. This one's really widely useful. But anytime you're trying to figure out whether to turn something on or off, make something happen or not happen, you could do it through things like the equal operator here, or the roughly equal operator. Or you can use Boolean gates. And the Boolean gates are perhaps a little confusing if you're not a programmer, but it's pretty quick to make sense of them. So here the deal is, we'll save the not one for last. I already showed you and, so both of these have to be true before something happens and passes through the other side. Or means either one of these could be true. Either the button's on or the gate's on, or the button's on or the gate's on. That's me holding the gate down, right? So or is like either one will trigger a true condition and make something happen. And then There's some other variations of or and that I'll let you investigate on your own. You can kind of see the short descriptions here, but the most common ones you're going to reach for are going to be and or. So I'm going to keep this short by only talking about those today. Now, not is a special case. Let's drag not in here. And I'm holding down a key to make it quiet. So what not is doing is it just basically flips something that's true to be false instead. So right now I'm holding down a key constantly. So the gate is open, which means it's true, but the not is flipping it around and saying, no, no, now it's false that you're holding a key down. But if I let go of the key, then the normal input condition is, well, it's true, but the not flips it around to say, no, no, it's not true. You're not holding down a key. I mean, you're not holding down a key. So I'm not holding a key, but this flips around to say, yes, you are holding a key. If I hold down the key, it says, no, you're not. You're not holding a key at all, right? So that's what this does, is it just reverses the true or false signal or outcome. So that you might find some uses for that, but I haven't found too many uses for it. So that's logic in a nutshell. I will point out a couple other places that logic does show up. In the data section, again, there's two generators that deal specifically with logic. And I'm going to show, I do want to show you one more thing before we call this one quits. This is getting a teeny bit ahead of things, but it's kind of an important principle. So here's the gates thing, which is basically a sequencer that's spitting out gates. And you can look over here. Right now it's set to 8 steps. I'm going to turn all 8 steps on. And it's basically triggering for every bar at my current tempo, my current phase coming into the device. The phase pre-chord is on. So every bar beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're dividing it into 8 pulses, so these basically represent 8th notes, and it's spitting out a trigger at the start of every 8th note. If you look here, when this ramp starts down here and ends up here, there's going to be 8 of these that happen. 1, 2, 3, 8th notes. So if we look at this, this is what they look like. 8th notes at a tempo of 90. If I speed the tempo up, they're going to be a little shorter and faster because the tempo is faster. If I slow the tempo way down, they're going to be longer and spaced a little more apart because it's all about a subdivision of the tempo right now. These are even 8th notes. Now, if I hook this up to the gate down here, right? Constant gates, 8th notes. If I turn some of these off, now we can create a pattern. Okay. Now, this is happening because, now let me turn this off for a second. All right. This is happening because the gate sequencer, the data generator for gates, is specifically triggering a full value of 1 all the way at the top of the oscilloscope for every one of these gates that is lit up. What I want to show you is other generators that are a different color, like steps. Okay, this is also a sequencer, and I dragged it over here, and now we're in steps, even though it looks exactly like it did before. Difference is I can set the height or strength on these. So let's set these all down to 0 for now. Let's turn it on. There you select you, turn you on. Okay. So it's moving through at a pace of every 8th note. 8, 8, 8, 8, 8. Okay, so it's still an 8th note thing. As I drag these things up, it's generating signals, right? But the signals never go all the way to the top. They never go all the way to 1. So even though I could use a step sequencer to drive something like a gate on an envelope, it's not going to do me any good unless these signals effectively go above 50%. So watch, I'm going to take this one signal in the middle and drag it somewhere above the midline. So it has to go over 50% to trigger a gated input or a triggered input. Now let me turn that off, right? If I bring this one up, bring this one all the way to the top. Okay, so that's the main point I wanted to make here, is that when some signal is stronger than 50%, and that's being fed into any sort of yellow gate port, that's going to trigger the gate. Or if it's fed into a yellow trigger port, the signal has to be stronger than positive 50% to trigger this. So it doesn't have to go all the way to 1, but that's the simplest, is to just use something like the gates sequencer that's generating signals that are always at a maximum value of 1. They're all the way at the top of the oscilloscope. But basically that dividing line is anything above 50% strength of a positive unipolar signal will trigger a gate. I'm sorry, it'll trigger a trigger port, or it'll trigger a gate port. Okay, that's it. Thanks for hanging with me. We'll take a deeper dive into this gate stuff in the next video. See you.